This is your Wednesday Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. We got a lot to get to today, you guys. I'll have Jeff Day on the show in a little while. Jeff works at the Star-Tribune, has for quite some time now, and is going to help me out with this story on St. Thomas and just kind of how that program is transitioning to Division I, particularly its football program. I'm going to answer a whole bunch of your questions as well. Got some Ben Simmons stuff with the latest on that and him not reporting to training camp and saying he'll never play for the 76ers again. Interesting. My antenna is up. Got a Chicken Finger 69 statement, a question about Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman, and a bunch of other good stuff from you guys, so appreciate that. We'll run through a whole bunch of those at the end of the show as well. But first, what did I miss? Well, the big story on Tuesday was the end of the stalemate between the Wild and Kirill Kaprizov. Got a deal done. In the end, the term ends up being 5 years, $45 million, about $9 million per season. That part of it, not surprising. I wrote on August 11th, I believe, for the love of the Wild, just get Kirill Kaprizov signed already. Talking about how neither side has a whole ton of leverage. The Wild's leverage was that Kaprizov can't sign anywhere else. Kaprizov's leverage is, he could just tank it by, not signing and, playing in Russia. But his leverage wasn't that great. So basically, the point of that was to say these sides need each other. They need to get a deal done. Let's get it done already. It took a long time, but back then I did write the easy answer is a 5-year deal for $9 million per season, which is exactly what he ended up signing. So seems like in the end, both sides just kind of figured it out, especially Kaprizov's side. I'm sure the Wild might have liked to sign him for an extra year or two, but in the end, I think 5 years is pretty good for the Wild. You get, it's not just like a 3-year deal where he's going to hit free agency right away again. And for Kaprizov, gives him another swing at free agency in his prime. He will be 29 next time he hits free agency, and that will be a time where he could really cash in with another long-term contract, assuming he continues on the arc that he showed last season when, let's face it, he transformed this franchise, right? That's why the Wild needed him. He was the Calder winner. He, clearly was the most dynamic player on this team, changed the outlook, the trajectory for this team. Now, the big question now becomes, how do you support Kaprizov and the rest of the players on the roster when a lot of the heaviest parts of his contract are going to come during the heaviest parts of the Zach Parise and Ryan Suter buyouts? Just looking at the Wild salary cap now this year, they're in fine shape because the Parise-Suter buyouts don't hit too hard this season. There's only about $4.7 million dead cap on the books this year from Suter and Parise. Wild making that work, getting it done, still should be able to field a competitive team this season, especially if some of their young players like Matt Boldy and Marco Rossi step up this season. Now, it gets a little complicated in future years, the next 3 after this in particular, because those are the years where the Suter and Parise buyouts count. $12.7 million next season, $14.7 million the year after that, $14.7 million the year after that. They're really going to need those young players. They're really going to have to make some hard decisions because they've still got guys like Jonas Brodin, Jared Spurgeon, Joel Eriksson-Ek, even some years of Matt Zuccarello, and of course Kaprizov now under contract for pretty big terms once you get into those heavy buyout years for Parise and Suter. Now, the nice thing about this deal is you do get an extra year. You get the 2025-26 season, which will be the last year of this contract, where you're almost done paying off that buyout. The dead cap on the Parise and Suter deals is only $1.6 million once you get to the last year of this Kaprizov deal, so you should be able to start thinking about how you're going to pay other guys at that point. So it's going to be a balancing act. Bill Guerin knew that going in, and we're going to hear from him sometime today. Hopefully have some content from Bill Guerin on tomorrow's podcast, by the way, along with Sarah McClellan from the Star-Tribune, who covers the Wild for the Star-Tribune. So we'll get into this in much more depth on Thursday's show, but it's going to be interesting to see how they navigate that piece of it. That was always going to be a question, but now that you see, I'm just looking at Cap Friendly right now, now that you see the numbers in black and white, you kind of see how much they've committed to certain years. There's going to be some decisions to make on players. Kevin Fiala, this is a big year for him because he just signed that 1-year contract and he's again a restricted free agent next year. It's going to be a hard decision probably on Matt Dumba coming up at some point, although he had a really good season last year. So what do you do there? Do you pay 3 defensemen, upwards of $20 million on your cap? How much does the NHL cap go up over the years? Does it start to accelerate again, or is it flat as we start to emerge at some point from the post-COVID economic landscape? I don't know. Bottom line, though, is they had to get this done. They got it done. They got him in before camp starts, which is nice. Won't be a camp distraction. Won't be the story lingering. Instead, they can talk about this as a positive story, and they can talk about how they want to get better for next season, and Kaprizov will be obviously a huge part of that.
I'm Chris Hine, Timberwolves beat writer at the Star Tribune and the first 5-time guest in daily delivery history. Thank you for listening to this podcast. This work is made possible by our Star Tribune subscribers. For unlimited access to the articles mentioned in this podcast, our coverage of Minnesota sports from pros to preps, and even all of Rand's future blog posts about how the Timberwolves should trade for players they will never get, go to startribune.com/subscribe.
I'd like to welcome Jeff Day onto Daily Delivery, first-time guest, Star Tribune multimedia writer, producer, expert, does a lot of different things at the Star Tribune and does them all very well. And I want to talk to Jeff about St. Thomas football today. Jeff, how are you doing today? And welcome to Daily Delivery.
Well, first, I think it's important. Expert, we just need to strike that from the record, but I am a multi-platform editor. I do a little bit of everything. And so I'm doing well. And St. Thomas football is something that I've gotten to start learning about, and meeting some of the players and staff and following that team as they go D1 has been, really fun and interesting. So it's something that I'm excited to talk about.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. I mean, just their whole transition to Division I across the board. I've talked to Rachel Blount about that a couple times for this podcast, but now it's real. I mean, they're playing games. They played the Gophers in volleyball a little while ago. They've played 2 football games already. They're 1-1. Now they get to play, get to enter their conference schedule and their home schedule Saturday against Butler. So as they've kind of made this transition, obviously football is, going to be one of the bigger challenges, I would imagine, just the size of the roster, the way you recruit in football. Like in basketball, you could get, reasonably competitive in a couple of years if you get a couple good recruiting classes. Football probably takes a while. So how are they feeling right now about kind of this leap and how it's going so far?
Well, the thing that I've noticed just in talking with some of the folks in their athletic department and talking with Glenn Caruso and even some of the players, I think there's a general feeling of excitement, to just be playing games again. They've had such a long break. B, to be going on this journey. I mean, it is, like you said, it is sort of the turning of a tanker. You're not just going to all of a sudden decide, hey, we're a Division I football team and everything's going to go perfectly and we're going to be as good as, Rutgers or something. They have to build this slowly. And I think when you look at something like UNI last week, or even when the St. Thomas volleyball team played the Gophers, you kind of see the litmus test. You say, okay, we're going to go play some really, really good competition. Some of when it comes to FCS football, UNI is one of obviously the best in that division and has been for a long time. When you look at D1 volleyball, obviously the Gophers and Hugh McCutcheon are some of the most, excellent players and program in the country. So they're getting this taste of the top level of some of these areas that they're trying to get into. And I think the overall feeling that I've noticed, at least, and one that's really, I think, enjoyable just as a sports fan, is just the overall excitement. This is very much so seemingly a learning experience for them. It's not like this has been some long-term pre-planned goal, a 20-year project to make this move. And so there is sometimes this element of, we don't know what's going to happen. We are learning as we go. And while every sports program, whether it be the Vikings or the Gophers, will say things like that, I think in this instance, you truly have a university that is out on a limb saying what's going to happen as we do this. And, like I said, there's something really exciting about that. And the access that they give us to players, to coaches, the ability to just observe that has been really rewarding as a journalist. I've enjoyed doing it a lot.
As you've done that so far, what have you observed from players? I mean, just excitement level, whether it's, just the eye-opening experience of being in Division One, or what are some of the things that you've kind of observed, at least so far?
Well, and this goes back to what I said at the beginning. This is really important for me to clarify, because I am not an expert on St. Thomas football, and a lot of the reporting I've done has been observational, and then mixed with some interviews. But what I see, and what is so exciting, after a year and a half or 2 years of living sort of a more closed existence, is just the enthusiasm. There is such a kind of youthful invigoration that comes from watching these players and these athletes get excited. It's like, oh, is there some gigantic challenge in our way? Well, that's okay. Let's go out and see what happens. And the thing that I noticed in watching the football team practice a number of times was that it was obvious that that coaching staff had built a structure in place that was obviously working at the D3 level very well. And it sure seems like they're just segueing it to a Division One platform. It's not like they're making some gigantic change to how they do things. They're just going to see how their identity and their systems work on a larger level. But everything is just so coordinated and controlled, and they clear. But then again, this goes back to what we were talking about before. They also are having to see, how is this going to work at this level? And that to me is what's going to make this entire season interesting. It's what's going to make the next couple of years interesting. And the Pioneer League seems to be, I don't think they're going to meet, I guess I'd have to look if they're going to meet a team as talented as UNI the rest of the way. I think you'd be hard pressed to find that. And I know that in the preseason, there were some people who thought they could play with some of these Pioneer League teams. And I'm sure that there's some excitement in kind of, okay, we went to Houghton, Michigan to play Michigan Tech. Yeah, a D2 team. But again, the longest road trip St. Thomas has taken as a football team in who knows how long, and outside of some playoff games. And to go open your first kind of football game in 18 or 20 months or whatever, and go on the road and win a close game. And then you go down to UNI, like we've talked about, one of the best FCS programs in the country, and you hang with them. You're not maybe on quite the same playing field, but that first half, they were 2 scores away. They hung in the third quarter. Their offense couldn't get going, but their defense was really pretty dang good, and turnovers hurt them and things like that. But again, it was kind of this feeling of, where are we? What are we doing? And I think they can come home and go into this Butler game and say, we can play. We can play. Sure. We're not getting completely embarrassed. And we're 1-1, which is better than some of the, other football teams in the state. So not bad.
That is true. When you find a way to win close games, not lose close games. I don't want to cast aspersions on any pro local teams here, but that is exciting. That said, we imagine, and they're fully aware of it, that there's going to be lumps along the way with this transition. They're not expecting to win right away. That said, they were essentially kicked out of their old conference because they were too good, because they won too much across the board in sports. And, now this transition to Division One, I imagine this piece of it, like the knowledge or the mental side of, yeah, we know we're going to lose, is different than the actual, oh man, we just lost. Even if it was a competitive loss, even if you lose 44-3 or whatever the final was against Northern Iowa after, things got a little lopsided at the end, that's got to feel different than intellectually knowing that you're going to lose some of these games.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I think that I'm sure that is what the coaching staff is talking about this week is, okay, how do we take what happened and learn from it and find a way to navigate it? I mean, one of the things that, I went to St. Thomas a long time ago. And when I went there, I graduated in 2007. And when I went there, the athletics program was not some beacon of excellence. And when I went on campus, it was the first time I had been on campus since I graduated. And this athletics center, which apparently opened after I graduated and has been there for 10 years, which I don't want to do that math exactly. But to me, I was looking at it going, I can't believe this is here. I can't believe what I'm seeing in terms of just how they have incorporated that into the football field, into that part of campus. And so there was a part of me looking at it going, yeah, this doesn't feel like quite the same program, but it does surprise me that in that 14 years or whatever, they have gone from being an athletic, department, athletics program that was maybe average in Division III and in the MIAC to completely ostracized from the conference and, right. and forced to make this move. It's like, it for me, it was very much a through the looking glass at St. Thomas as a athletics department. And part of what to me is fascinating is that the whole department is having to go through this. It is not just the players, it's not just the coaches. It's like, okay, how do you as an SID, how do you as an athletics director, how do you as a campus, how do you kind of build this new reality, you know, when it comes to things like media requests, when it comes to attention and coverage, when it comes to expectation and all of those kind of things. It's been one of the interesting elements of when you write about St. Thomas. You know, the reason that we're covering them is because, again, this is a very rare thing. It's not common for a program to make this kind of leap. I think we've seen that it's happened twice in the history of collegiate athletics. And so it's interesting. And one of the things that remains interesting to me is that people still kind of have this viewpoint towards them as a program, this kind of disdain. And I don't fully understand that. And that kind of comes from the fact that, to me, they're just a program that really started ascending and then quickly were removed from the equation and hostility kind of bred in that ground. But when I look at them now, to me, it's like you're starting over in a way.
Sure.
Whatever successes and accomplishments you have had, just like you said, the intellectual element of we're going D1 is much different than the reality of, hey, UNI just beat us 44-3. We're playing in a 16,000 seat dome stadium against a team that just took Iowa State toe to toe in Ames 2 weeks ago. You know, these are gigantic leaps for this program, and we're going to keep seeing it. They got thrashed by the Gophers in volleyball because you're playing the Gophers in volleyball. They're
right.
one of the best teams in the country. So I don't know. I like all of it. I find it all really, really interesting. And I think they have the right attitude towards it. And I'll be very curious to see how they do with Butler. Cause like I said, I think that some of these Pioneer League teams, they'll be able to hang with.
I think that's interesting too. Last thing on this subject for you, Jeff Day, enjoying this conversation. Let's do this again soon, talking St. Thomas or whatever it might be. I'll be interested really to see, and this will kind of be up to us kind of to a certain degree too, and the decisions we make as a media company and others do too. I'll be interested to see kind of what place they kind of carve out in the Division as a Division I program, what kind of coverage they get, how people view them, because obviously they will not be on the same level as the University of Minnesota, which is, a Big Ten school, the flagship university. But, outside of hockey, the University of Minnesota has never had any competition at the Division I level. Now you have a school across the board that has done this. And if in 5 years they're having a level of success in some of these sports, I will be very interested to see kind of how that gets treated in this marketplace.
Well, I think it's okay to kind of air some of this, because I think it is interesting that we as a department have had to have these discussions to discuss how do we cover this team? What is their relationship to our readership? And one of the unique elements of them, as opposed to, say, Minnesota Duluth or Mankato or St. Cloud, is that they are here.
Yes.
The St. Thomas campus is as close to my house in Minneapolis as Dinkytown. And so there is this part of, they are going to compete for Metro players. We saw it just a couple of days ago. They landed a big basketball recruit whose name is going to evade me, so we'll just leave it as it is. But they landed a kid who 247 had as, one of the 5 best players in the state. And I think, top 100 nationally, and people, ranking services are what they are, but nonetheless, that kid is a name, and they grabbed him. And that's the kind of element that you're talking about is, what does this look like? And part of it too is they're going to be a part of that as well. And it's what I really like about it is that it does feel new. And even when I was talking, when they signed their new deal with KSTP, and I was talking with their play-by-play announcer, and he was saying, this is part of the joy of this. There are now only 2 Division I programs in football in the state of Minnesota, 2 Division I basketball programs, and they are carving out what they want to be in this landscape. And kind of as we alluded to earlier, this was not some long-term plan on their part. They're having to do it on the fly. And I'm telling you, if you go over there and you talk to their sports athletic people, you talk with their coaches, you get that sensation, which is, we're seeing what's happening as it happens, and then you make your next move. And that's really exciting to me as a journalist and as a sports observer, because so much of the sports landscape feels settled, and we know what to expect. A missed field goal here, a road win there. But this is like, well, we have no idea what's going to happen week to week.
Absolutely. We do know, though, that they're going to play their first Division I home football game Saturday against Butler. We don't know what's going to happen, but again, that is as Aaron Rodgers would say, the beautiful mystery of it all. Well, great catching up with you, Jeff Day. Really interesting stuff. Interested to read what else you have cooked up as you get to know these guys even more. Follow that coverage, Star Tribune, startribune.com. And Jeff, let's do this again soon. All right.
All right. Thanks, Michael.
Hope you enjoyed that conversation with Jeff Day. Just an interesting look at St. Thomas. What's going to be an interesting transition for them to Division I that's, in the midst right now. They're actually playing games, and we'll see, how long it will take. I hope that at some point they, there's a competitive rivalry that develops with the Gophers in certain sports, particularly basketball sport, where you get 3-4 players and suddenly you can compete on that level. A smaller school can compete with a bigger school and become something pretty cool in this market. So we'll be watching that, and Jeff will be all over it as usual. So listen and read for that in Star Tribune and on this podcast. All right, let's run through a bunch of your questions. Had a bunch of these stacking up, and I want to get to them. The first one actually just came this morning from Anthony. Says, Randball seems eerily quiet about the latest Ben Simmons news. Hope he is okay and didn't suffer any sort of medical issues. No, I'm fine. I actually was going to write about it yesterday. You guys know me all too well. But Chris Hine, our beat writer, was all over that one yesterday. You should go read that on StarTribune.com. He wrote about that for StarTribune.com and the newspaper, basically comparing the Ben Simmons story to Jimmy Butler, which actually was the direction I was going to go as well. So you can tell our minds are of the same in that regard, because I was his editor when the whole Butler thing broke with the Wolves. But it's kind of the Butler trade in reverse, possibly, right? Because Butler went to Philly, had the Wolves lost all sorts of leverage, and now Ben Simmons is saying, I'm not going to go to training camp with the 76ers. I never want to play for them again. That was an Adrian Wojnarowski report on Tuesday. So now, what's the importance of that is what I want to get to. I think the significance of that is this. What I've been reading over the last couple of months as the Simmons saga had kind of played out. He had the bad playoffs, the assumption of a trade, then picking up steam, the Wolves interested, other teams interested. The big thing you kept hearing was that Philadelphia kept hoping that they could maximize value, kind of recoup some of their leverage and some of his value by maybe not making the first deal possible, by maybe even carrying him into the regular season and trying to see, get him back on the court, regain some of that chemistry, let him play, let people see that that he's still a high caliber player, instead of having the last impression be what you saw in the playoffs, where he couldn't shoot, couldn't make free throws, was passed up a dunk in a key moment when they lost to the Hawks in the Eastern Conference semifinals. So that all said, that went by the wayside, I think, when he makes this, reportedly at least, makes this bold proclamation that he's not going to play for them. That takes away a lot of Philadelphia's possible leverage that they were going to try to gain back, right? Now you can't just say, well, we're going to wait this out. Now it becomes a camp story. Now it becomes he's not going to report. Now it becomes he's not going to help you on the court right away. And, you're not going to have players in return for him right away unless you make a trade that can help you. And if you got aspirations to win right away this season, you can't afford to fall, even if you trade him 3 weeks into the season, you didn't have him, and all of a sudden you're like 5-7 without him. That's a hole you've dug. So what this does is puts pressure on Philadelphia to make a trade sooner rather than later, and I think that plays into the Wolves' hands. Now, what are the Wolves trying to offer? My best guess is it's something like D'Angelo Russell, Malik Beasley, and 2 lightly protected first-round picks, and I think that's a pretty fair deal. You could also see something like Malik Beasley, Jaden McDaniels, some other salary, and those 2 picks if Philadelphia doesn't want Russell as part of the deal. I feel like they probably would, even though Russell is not a perfect player by any means. So still, like we've been writing, like we've been saying all along, still feels like a third team is necessary to make this deal happen. If you are the Wolves, you need a team that wants picks and young players, because the Wolves don't just have that one star that they would be willing to give up in a swap. They got to keep Anthony Edwards, got to keep Karl-Anthony Towns in any trade. I think D'Angelo Russell is movable, but how much does Philadelphia want him becomes the question. So all that said, it's another kind of turn of the screw and a big one in this story, and you could see some movement on this soon because, guys, camp opens in 6 days. It's not like this is some distant memory or distant, future thing that's going to happen. Like, training camp starts in 6 days. Like, this is going to become a thing. Media day is in 5 days for all these teams. Like, this is going to be a question, and this might spur some action between now and then, or at least soon in training camp. So keep an eye out for all of that. And of course, yes, I will be writing about it and talking about it because I can't stay away from it. Okay, at Zero Dice wants to know, do Zimmer and or Spielman last the year? If not, when do you predict they get fired? Now, I did cover this somewhat on Tuesday's show, so I won't dwell on this too long, but I think it's an interesting question because I could see this, you've got 3 home games coming up in a row right now. If things go particularly sideways right now, especially, if you lose all 3, that would include a loss to Detroit. If you get to your bye and you're 0-6 or 1-5, that could be the point where you make a move, right? Because that just means you're not going to get done. I know they started 1-5 last season and got to 6-6 and kind of rescued at least some semblance of relevancy last season, but I don't think they can afford to do that again this year. So I think these next 4 games are very important for that. Now, that said, the Wilfs have been very patient. They like this regime, and I don't see an immediate in-house candidate, especially to replace Mike Zimmer. They could at some points it doesn't matter. Like you make the move and you get through the year, and that's that. But there's Gary Kubiak's not here anymore. Kevin Stefanski's not here anymore. Like, who would be the obvious choice to replace Zimmer as interim head coach for the rest of the year? I think it'd probably be Andre Patterson. That'd be my first choice. That'd be the one that I think is the most qualified and certainly has the most, I think, whatever it is with the players that would resonate with the players. So that would be my choice. But again, we're getting far down the road there. But it could be a consideration. Like, who would is there a natural replacement that you would like to give a chance to? I don't know that there necessarily is. Andre Patterson, I guess, like I said, would be that guy for me. But long story short, these next 4 games are very important, I think, in the grand scheme of their job security. Kind of along the same lines, Chicken Finger 69 has a statement that says the Minnesota Vikings will secure the number 1 pick in the 2022 draft, but the team's biggest need, a transformational, generational building block quarterback, will not exist in the 2022 playoff. I call it the Timberwolves paradox. That's a lot to take in. I think I don't think the Vikings will be that bad. I think this is a team with too much talent. If they are bad this year, and they're 0-2 through 2 games in a 17-game season, I feel like this is more of like a 5-6 win team if things go really off the rails this season, not a 0-win team or a 2 or 3 or 4 win team even. So we'll see about that. But that is an interesting thing. Like, last year, obviously, if they'd been tanking for Trevor, they would have had their franchise quarterback. This year, maybe not as deep in quarterbacks if they wind up going that direction. So something to watch out for. You're right. Although I will say this, Kirk Cousins has not been the problem so far, and if you have to have him for 1 more year next season, even at a big cap hit, that's not the worst thing in the world. Couple more here. I got a hot take from Ruslan Botov. Marco Rossi wins Rookie of the Year. Like it. Wild would love that too. Back-to-back Calder Trophy winners, more young talent, things like that. He's just, a guy who's very important coming back, obviously, from the year he had last year where he had COVID. He had the myocarditis as he tried to come back from COVID. It would be a huge thing for him. It'd be a huge thing for the Wild to have someone playing at that high of a level on an entry-level contract. That would put them at another level, and I don't think it's too far-fetched to think that Marco Rossi, especially if he's paired up with the right players, especially if he's playing maybe alongside Kaprizov this season, could be that kind of player. So I like the bold take, and I don't think it's that far off. Last one. Jordan wants to know, who's your favorite out of the elite field to win the Twin Cities Marathon? I'd love to hear some coverage of the race in an upcoming show. Got to admit, I don't know who the favorites would be at this moment, but I do want to do some coverage of the marathon as we get closer to it. So I will do my best to get some of that, Jordan, and get some answers for you in the next week or two. Thanks, everybody, for all the great questions and for listening today. Hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, tons of wild stuff coming up on Thursday's show. Friday's show, we'll have Mark Craig on the show to do his picks and a special guest. Won't give that one away yet, but it's going to be a fun one talking about NFL kickers on Friday's show. Thanks for listening today. I'm Michael Rand. Download this podcast. Write a review if you would. We'll see you again on Thursday.